On this episode of the Not So Average Jane podcast, Kimberly Herm, a Navy officer with multiple tours, shares her journey of helping to rebuild Afghanistan, discussing some very risky and vulnerable missions and how they've all seemed to catch up with her today as she starts her healing journey set to now take on the civilian world.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me today on the Not So Average Jane podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of discussing all the stuff and things when it comes to the military with Kimberly Herm. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dallas, for having me.
So we connected on Facebook, which is fun, kind of, not knowing anything about each other and then learning from what the social media perspective allows us to see. But I've been kind of talking a lot lately about how literally we're only putting in highlight reels of our life. And I love to be able to dive into the depths of what's actually going on kind of behind the scenes. And that's really what this podcast is understanding what women in the military and in this forum, combat females in the military are, what's going on behind the scenes. And so I would love to just start out by you kind of introducing to the audience how you came to join the military, maybe share your enlistment story.
Okay, great. Well, so I actually joined through the ROTC program and commissioned as an officer in the Navy in 2009. I'd originally joined the military because I didn't know what I wanted to do out of high school. My parents really wanted to make sure that I went to college. They also really wanted to make sure that they didn't have to pay for it. So they really pushed for me to join the military. And I kind of latched onto it because it sounded exciting. It sounded like everything else sounded boring, but the military sounded like it would be exciting. So I figured, why not go do something exciting and also get to go to school for free. So I kind of latched on to that idea. And initially I joined because I really wanted to be a pilot, which is why I had joined the Navy specifically. After doing a lot of research, realized it's easier to fly in the Navy than some of the other services. So I was like, well, I'll join the Navy. I'll be a pilot. So I did 4 years of the ROTC program, went to flight school in Pensacola, Florida, and realized shortly after getting there that flying was not a good match for me. I get very motion sickness, and I just didn't enjoy it. Everyone around me loved it and had been very passionate since they were a young kid about flying, and I just didn't have that same joy that they had. But I had gone to school. I'd gotten a degree in engineering, and while I was in school, I learned about the Navy's Civil Engineer Corps. And so when I dropped out of flight school, I put in a package to transition into the Civil Engineer Corps, which most people probably associate with the Seabees in the Navy. So took a couple months, but then eventually got picked up to transition into the Civil Engineer Corps and go train with the Seabees.
Well, that's cool. So you get motion sick, huh? I get motion sickness sitting in the back car or even in the passenger side if I'm looking down. So I don't think I would ever be a candidate for being a pilot. So where did the passion for flying come from? Was that something like as a little girl you enjoyed, or it was just kind of something that popped up?
It's kind of something that popped up. It just sounded exciting. All I knew is I wanted to do something exciting, and most things sounded boring.
Are you an adrenaline junkie?
Kind of, not so much now, but definitely when I was younger, I was.
Yeah, you sound like you're not someone who wants to get involved in something unless it's like fun.
Definitely. So,
All right. So you get through training, you joined in 2009, 4 years of ROTC. You figure out flight school isn't for you. You leverage your degree to reclass or re-navigate into civil engineering. So talk about that. What does that look like? What is civil engineering, from a basic perspective?
So civil engineering in the Navy, we do 2 primary mission sets. We deploy with the Seabees, who do contingency engineering all over the world, which is, we go to different places and build schools or roads with either partner nations or people that we want to work with and partner with. And on the flip side of that, and what I do right now, is we also maintain all of our Navy and Marine Corps bases. So we do all the facilities work to keep all of the bases that we own and operate up and running to support the warfighters.
Understood. So all over the world, talk to me about where you've been when you say all over the world.
So my very first tour out of training, I was with the Seabees, stationed here in San Diego, California. And we deployed my very first deployment. I call it a mini deployment because it was about 2.5 months long, but it was just a short deployment. We went to Indonesia as part of a larger exercise. I led a jet of 15 Seabees, and we went and spent 2.5 months building a school with the Indonesian Marines. So we partnered with the local host nation, and we built a school for them. And it was a really great experience, a lot of learning. I was very young, early 20s at the time, and kind of out on my own. And just understanding, we didn't have a lot of equipment. We didn't have a lot of, the stuff you would normally think of that you would need to build to build a school. So we're building very basic, like brick and mortar school, very, very basic. But it was a really great experience to learn from the partner nations, kind of their struggles in the military, and interact with them and teach them how we do things. One of the most impactful experiences that I had from that deployment was I had met a more senior female officer from the Indonesian Marines who had come out to visit our site one day. I think she was like a security officer or something. And she said, "I'm so happy that they sent a female, because I've been doing this for a long time and I feel like I'm always running into walls. So when other nations send females, it validates what I've been doing for a really long time." So always remember that at the time I thought, I'm very young, I'm still trying to figure it out, but it still, furthered what she was trying to do, and it helped her. But I also remember that their OIC that they had for the Indonesian Marines when we got on site was like, "Oh, here's your office." And he took me to the other side of the compound and showed me this office. And he's like, you can work here. And I'd be like, "No, I'm going to be on the site every day working with my team." And he's like, why would you do that? And I was like, "Because that's what you do." He's like, "But you should be in the office." And I was like, "No, I'll go do my reports every night once I get back to where I'm staying. I don't need to sit here in this office away from everyone." And he was just very perplexed but I made you an office. Like, we set up an office for you. Why would you not use it?
Cultural differences for sure, but that's interesting given what you just shared, having a senior female leader within their ranks, that he still made that assumption that you would not be on site, that you would be kind of hoarded away in an office somewhere. Was he aware he had a senior female leader?
I don't think so, because I don't think she was directly in his part of the organization. I think she was, he was with the combat engineers and she was with the security group. So he probably didn't interact with very many, if any, on a regular basis. So he probably saw her, but he probably didn't think too much about what her role was there and who she was and why she was there.
Yeah. Did you guys get to have any more in-depth conversations other than, "Hey, I'm glad to see another female around"?
No, unfortunately, she was just out there that one day. So that was just for a short visit. So that was really all we were able to discuss.
I bet the feeling was mutual, though, like that you still remember her and she probably still remembers you, and just the mutual validation and inspiration. And this kind of like translates, like you've seen, I'm sure, the memes and the sayings going around, like, if you see another queen straighten her crown, don't knock it off type of, scenario. And I think that's what you guys like did for each other out there. It was like you both validated its presence because it's hard. I've worked in a male dominant space my entire adult life, and it feels very discouraging at times to continue to fight, and it's exhausting to like fight to prove yourself, sometimes 2, 3, 7 times harder than what a man has to do in your same position.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so short little trip over to Indonesia to help build up some schools, get some inspiration from a fellow female leader from another country that is a little bit more strict, if you will, on what women can and cannot do. What happens next?
So I came home from that trip and had an email waiting for me from our detailer, who in the Navy, the detailers, the people who write your orders and give you your next assignment, basically saying, we need a lot more engineers to go on individual augmentations with the Army to Afghanistan. Your name came up. Do you want to go?
They actually asked you.
Well,
was it like voluntold type of situation, or were they truly asking you?
They had narrowed it down to a list of eligible people to go, and they'd reached out to those people to see who was going to bite. And part of the reason they reached out to me specifically was I am married to a Marine, and that I met in flight school, and he was still going through flight training at the time. So I was up for orders, but I didn't know where he was going to go. So their kind of promise was, well, go to Afghanistan for a year, and when you come back, he'll know where he is, and we can guarantee that we'll give you orders to where he's at.
That's comical, but sounds about right.
So a lot of people within my command that I was with at the time tried to convince me, oh, you don't want to go, you don't want to do it.
What year is this?
This was 2011.
Okay.
But the truth is, I knew I was going to say yes. Like, that's why ultimately I had signed up, right? I wanted to go support what we were doing. We were fighting these battles overseas, and I wanted to go be a part of it. So I pretended like I was thinking about it, but I knew once I saw that email that I was going to go.
Wow. So. I just got goosebumps. I love hearing the patriotism, if you will, for lack of a better term, that is often reserved for men. Oh, I'm gonna stop playing NFL and go fight in the war. But like, we're just as motivated, and you're the second woman that I've had on the podcast that was joined post 9/11, knew exactly what they were stepping into, and was very motivated to actually go overseas and try to make an impact in some way.
But I definitely felt, just like you said, like I shouldn't be that way. So I remember at the time being like, oh, I'm thinking about it, I don't know, and feeling like I had to act like
you were taking it into consideration.
I was taking into consideration, and that I was, tentative about whether or not I was going to go. I felt like that. I felt like it would come off wrong if I was just like, yes, sign me up, I'm going, I'll go tomorrow. And I don't know why. I guess it was just that stereotype of, that's how I felt like I should respond, even though it was different then.
Was that primarily like with your family, or was that even within your own unit?
It was both. It was with my family and within my own unit as well. They were actually more so the ones who were trying to tell me not to go.
The family?
No, my actual unit. Yeah.
Wow.
So
did they give any like reasoning or context to why?
Just, well, it's dangerous out there, and you can do all these other things. And it was an individual augmentation, so you go as an individual, and so it can have varying impacts on your career depending, because you're not attached to a unit. So sometimes it's not looked at as very positive for promotion because you're not getting ranked similarly for promotion going forward. So they were very easy to point out, all the reasons why it might be detrimental. Probably just because they thought, oh, someone else will go, she doesn't have to.
Do you feel like there was any envy in that?
I don't think so. Most of the people who were in my unit at the time were much older and much more senior and had already all been around the block.
Gotcha.
So I think they really just thought they were protecting me because I was the only female officer and I was much younger than everyone, all the other officers. And so I think they really just thought they were trying to protect me.
Did you feel like you needed to be protected?
No, but I often felt like that unit tried to protect me.
All right, so you say yes.
So I said yes. And 2 months later, they sent us to Indiana for four months of pre-deployment training with the Army. And that's where we aggregated our team. So I was going to deploy as part of a provincial reconstruction team. So all the individual augmentees from the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, as well as our infantry support, security support unit, we all aggregated in Indiana and developed our teams. And so we spent 4 months basically getting to know each other, learning how to operate as a team and getting prepared to go deploy to Afghanistan.
So 4 months of training, getting to know your brother and sisters. How many other women are in your newfound team?
We started with 80 people, and I think there was like 5 or 6 females, and we ended up deploying with about 60 people, 4 of which were females.
60 people, 4 females, including yourself.
Right.
Okay. So off to Afghanistan. You want to talk about some of the missions you had there?
Yeah, so as the provincial reconstruction team and as an engineer, my primary mission was we were awarding contracts for Afghans to help rebuild Afghanistan. So we would go out on missions. We were paying for them to build schools and roads and canals and repair their courthouse. So we would essentially write a contract for them and then pay them to do the work and then go out to make sure that they were actually building what we paid them to do and not taking the money and putting it elsewhere, and that it was actually what they said it was. So a lot of the schools we were having them build were girls' schools. So we would go out and make sure that, as they were finishing, they were actually using them to educate girls, not using them for other purposes. And we also engaged heavily with the province we were in, with the provincial leadership, and then also the district leadership within the provinces. So we would go on a weekly basis. We'd meet with the provincial engineers who kind of manage the governmental infrastructure money for their province. And we kind of talked to them about how to manage infrastructure on their own so that eventually one day they can do it for themselves without relying on us to pour all that money in for them to build the infrastructure that they need. And we'd also work with connecting the provincial leaders with the district leaders. And so we'd go out to the various districts and understand from them what their concerns were and take that back to the province and try to teach them that you should be doing this. Like, you should be going out in your own province and talking to your own people, and you should be identifying the issues. And we were kind of bridging that gap.
Kind of like a liaison role, right? In between what's going on in the field and the government.
Right. So, and part of that too, we also heavily supported a lot of the other units in our area. So I would go out on some missions with, there were some special forces teams and some like the infantry companies in the area that they would say, hey, these contacts that we've met with have this building problem and they want an engineer to come out. If you come out with us and you take a look at it, it buys us some good credit that we brought an engineer to look at their problem, and then they're more likely to give us intel and the information we want from them. So
you as bait. That's cool.
So we were pretty much traveling all over the place, meeting within our province, meeting with all different sorts of people, and then back at the base, we were on a very small base, so we also ran our base. So we also would, stand security watches and stand watches in the operations center, and then do all those things when we weren't out on mission. And so it's a very busy time.
Talk to me about the interactions that you had with the locals.
Most of them were pretty positive. For the most part, they were happy that we were there, helping them build. But some of them it was interesting, and I've read about this in other books as well. Being a female, hear about it, in Afghanistan, females, you can't interact with females. But like, as an American female soldier or sailor, you're kind of like a third space, a third gender. So they can interact with us differently than they would other people. So they're more intimidated by like the male soldiers, and like normal women in their culture are, they can't interact with. So we're kind of this unique, they can interact with us in a different way, a less threatening way than other soldiers. So kind of made for a unique experience in some of the interactions that I was able to have while I was out there. It was also interesting too, because there was places I was allowed to go that they didn't want other people to go. So I remember we had a school that we had built, and we were going back to make sure it was a girls' school. We were going back to make sure they were using it. And we'd also heard some complaints about, I think it was leaking, and there was some issue with the power. And so they wanted us to come out and look at it. And we got there, and it was in a big compound. And they're like, you guys can't come in here. And we're like, but you guys asked
the meals, because
when they showed up, they said, oh wait, you guys can't actually come in here. Like, school's happening. You have to come back when there's no girls here. Like, well, we can't do that. We're here now. You need to let us in. And so they brought me to the front, and they're like, this is our engineer. She's a female. And they're like, oh, well, she can go in with her interpreter. And so it was unique. And then of course, my guys were like, she can go in. We have to come in and provide security for her. She can't just go in. She can't just go in there by herself. So eventually they conceded and let us go in. And I remember walking into this school, and there was chaos in the school, because all of a sudden the army's coming in and the soldiers are coming in, and like children had run like screaming and hiding under the table. And because they didn't know why we were here, and no one had told them why we were here. So I remember going in and like taking off my glasses and my helmet, and having the interpreter like, this is an engineer, she's here to help, and like instantly bringing this calm to the room by my presence, by my unthreatening presence. But I also remember thinking, like, this is crazy. Like, none of the guys that I'm with are taking off their helmets in this middle of a, combat zone out in a like unsafe area. But they're like, you got to do it, because that's how they know we're safe. That's how we know we're here to help and not to hurt them. So it was just a very interesting experience. And I had numerous interactions like that, where I was able to go into spaces, either be it homes or other engagements that other people were not able to go into. But on the flip side, there was one engagement I went to in one of the districts, and I showed up, and the district leader was like, oh my gosh, you brought a female here. He's like, you have to wear this scarf or you can't come in. And he gave me this scarf and put it on me, and that was the only way I was allowed to be in his compound. And I got lice.
Wrapped around your Kevlar?
Yeah, and I got lice. I got the worst lice of my life. And
you got lice?
I got lice.
Maybe he did it on purpose. He gave you a scarf wrapped in lice. That's just, oh my God, you got lice in Afghanistan?
I got lice in Afghanistan. It was horrible. So lots of varied experiences working with, with the people we were there to support.
But for the most part, you were welcomed and you were given unique access when otherwise an all male unit approaching wouldn't have been given access. So you were a valuable asset to the unit, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And a vulnerable one as well. How did it make you feel? And maybe not in that moment, because I know what it's like to be in a moment and like you don't really have time to feel. It's the mission, right? That's the mission. This is what we came here to do. I need to get in this school. I need to take a look around. So you don't have time to feel. But I mean, whether it was later that day, that week, or once you came home, or even now looking back, how did that make you feel, being put in those very vulnerable situations in order to push the mission forward?
And that's something I didn't really think about much at the time until later, because that's one example. Another example is, like I said, I was supporting all these different units. So there's be lots of times where I'd be going somewhere by myself to go link up at a different fob with a different unit. And
Like completely by yourself, like getting in a vehicle and driving by yourself?
Well, so like one specific time I was going out to the Pesh Valley of Kunar. So one of the most historically dangerous places in Afghanistan, because we had a school out there. There was stuff going on. I needed to go look at it, and the infantry unit wanted me to come look at it to help them work through their issue. And they only flew out to this farm on the darkest nights with no light in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got on the flight. We got manifested for the flight. And that night, I remember the evening before being like, what do I do? And they're like, you just go up to the flight line and wait for the helicopter to pick you up at like 2 a.m. And I didn't have night vision goggles. I didn't have anyone with me. And it's pitch black and there's multiple helicopters coming in. And I'm like, how do I know which is the right one? And I just remember sitting up there for like hours because it was delayed and I didn't have a radio to talk to anyone. And eventually I get on the helicopter and the crew chief on the helicopter is like, hey, just so you know, we have one more stop before we go where we're going. We're going to load this bird up with Afghan soldiers and you're going to be their escort since we already had you manifested on this flight. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, well, you just sit at the top of the helicopter, basically between the Afghans and the cockpit, and keep an eye on everyone. And he's like, well, otherwise that you don't have to do very much. But so we load up these Afghans and we land in this fob in the middle of the night. And we all unload. I'm the last one off the bird. And like the minute I break the plane of the helicopter, it takes off because they do not want to be on that fob any longer than they have to be. And I just remember I had not even had time to step away from the helicopter. So it like knocked me down. So I stand up and all the Afghans are like running away in one direction. And I just stood there and I was like, I have no idea where I'm going. I've never been here before, the dead of night. Like, and kind of wandering around trying to figure out where I was supposed to go. And at one point, one Afghan was like, no, go that way. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go this way. And I walked up this hill and I found a building and I knocked on the door and they're like, oh, you made it. I got there, I finally linked up with these guys. We went out on mission the next day. And we went out on a couple missions. I went back, and then a couple months later, they asked me to come back. And I remember at that time in the moment being like, I've made it. Like, I have proven myself. Like, I went out to one of the most dangerous places on earth by myself with like a platoon full of Army like Rangers as a like female in the Navy, and they want me to come back. Like, I have proven myself. And in the moment, that was great. But then later, thinking about it, when I was there, I was the only female there. I didn't go to the bathroom when I was there because they had to stand outside and guard the bathroom. But you weren't allowed to be outside there because it was so dangerous. So every time I went to the bathroom or took a shower, someone was guarding a door and putting themselves at risk. So I just remember being like, I'm going to like do as little as possible to like not impact these people. And at the time it was like, this is what I have to do, to prove myself. But looking back at it, I'm like, that's completely crazy. Like, all of it is, completely crazy. But I like willingly did that because I felt like I needed to prove something. I felt like I needed to prove myself, what I could do, what females could do, what the like people in the Navy could do. So it's one of those things. It's taken a long time to look at it after the fact and actually think about it and process all of that from a different perspective, and process it all from a perspective of, yeah, that's great, but also, wow, that was a really bad situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think about those moments like currently? Like, have they caught up with you?
Sometimes, more so probably lately than before. So after that deployment, I came back, and my husband was in North Carolina, so I got orders to go to North Carolina. But I came back by myself, so the team separated in Afghanistan. And I showed up in this town where I didn't know anyone but my husband, and I showed up in a job where I was working for the base, so primarily working with older government civilian employees. It's like everyone who I worked with was 30 years or more older than me. And so there was completely different environment than the environment I had just come from. And then my husband deployed to Afghanistan a month later. So I had no one to talk about anything with. I had no one to process anything with. I really lacked that camaraderie. And at the time, obviously, like, we were working on the Marine Corps base, and I made some friends who had spouses who were Marines, so they'd invite me to things. And I remember trying to talk with these Marines about, they'd be sharing their stories, so I'd try to share mine, and they would basically be like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, what have you done? So I just stopped talking about it. Like, I stopped engaging in those conversations. And so for a long time, I just never brought it up and never talked about it. And then I just like never thought about it, or would try not to think about it.
Yeah.
And then over a long time, it became this division between like my experiences now and my experiences before. And it's been more of a process of trying to put them together back to like the experience of my life. Like, I recently found a picture of myself from when I was in Afghanistan, and I've stared at it for hours. I'm like, I don't even recognize that person. Like, I don't even remember being that person. So trying to put all the pieces of myself back together and look at it from this different narrative than the narrative I've told myself all this time is those experiences, because no one else validated them. They're still real. They're still my own experiences. They were still hard. They were still challenging in a different way.
Yeah. So, timeline real quick. You leave to Afghanistan in 2011. That was when you got the email.
Yeah, so we went to training in October of 2011.
Okay, so left early 2012.
Yeah, we deployed in February of 2012. We came back in November of 2012.
Okay. And then to North Carolina. And then you're supposed to be happy, right? Because they kept their word and they put you and your husband together, but then a month later he ships off and now you're in this new space with new people and no one that truly understands what you've just been through and no one that you felt close enough to be vulnerable with to discuss it. And it sounds like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, even the people that you tried to confide in, they didn't really give you a safe space to share and they weren't necessarily open to your perspective and they kind of just brushed you to the side. And so as a coping mechanism, you just kind of shut down. And I use this analogy that I took my deployment and put it into a black box and locked it up and threw it in the back of my head. And that was that. For 19 years, I left it there.
Yep.
But then when you open Pandora's box, there's a lot of things that come to the surface and a lot of emotions that were denied, a lot of feelings that haven't yet been processed. And I hear you when you say like no one else was there to validate you. I hear you so loud and so clear because I felt that when I was getting ready to literally pull the trigger on publishing the book. I'm like, what? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to share my story. Like, people are going to be like, oh, great. Like, it's not a Black Hawk Down type of story. It's not a Sony production thing, but that wasn't the point of it. And so with that in mind, like now that you've reached this new point where it sounds like you're attempting or already knee deep into kind of like a healing journey, if you will, processing it all, what's coming to the surface? What are some of the things? Because what I realized is that I had a lot of anger, but what I've also come to understand through conversation and reading things about emotions and processing it is that anger is a surface level emotion. And if you peel that anger away, there's something deeper that's there. And so a lot of my anger was actually disappointment and being scared and things of that nature that I never allowed myself to feel or process because I had to just proceed with the mission. Or I just had to go about doing things like they didn't bother me because that's what the guys were doing, or that's what was expected of me. And it took its toll on me. It took its toll on me in ways in relationships that I had after I got out of the military. I should say after I got home from deployment, it took its toll on relationships, both friendship and romantic. It took its toll on my relationship with my kids. It's taken a toll on whether or not I let people in and how much I say and what I choose to divulge to them. So just curious, are you having or feeling or gone through any of those similar types of things?
Definitely. So, one of the things that my husband and I kind of talked about was because we would email throughout our deployment, and he pointed out to me last year, like an email that was midway through deployment where he had written me and he's like, you're different. You've changed. Like something's going on. And I like adamantly denied it. And like we adamantly denied it forever. And it took a toll on our relationship. And it wasn't until last year that we really decided to, okay, we need to assess what all this stuff that's going on is, and we need to fix whatever is going on. And that was kind of what it took to start looking into trying to remember some of these things and trying to think about it and try to figure out, how did we get here, and trying to put the pieces back together. And what I kind of realized from that is I have these random memories, but there's other things I don't remember at all. And I have a very, like, it's hard to put it in a timeline. It's hard to like really remember the sequence of events. And I didn't write a journal or anything about it. All I had is the emails my husband and I wrote back and forth, which were not that deep about whatever was going on. It was just much more conversational.
Yeah, it has to be.
And so trying to do some deep searching into, what are these things, and being able to talk about stuff that I just never wanted to talk about. And I think part of the reason I never wanted to talk about it was there were certain things that were hard, or certain things that, I was proud of. And I felt like if I told someone those things, they would say like, that's not hard, or you shouldn't be proud of that. And that they would take like what I did have, what I did have out of that away from me. And then it would make the whole thing like I did it for nothing. So I think I just held it very close because I was worried someone would take it from me. So it's been more of the journey of it's mine, no matter what someone else says, no matter however someone else responds, and just trying to just reconcile that in myself. And actually it was interesting because a couple weeks ago, so I'm currently in the process of transitioning out of the Navy. And part of what came out of this for me is it's the right time in my career to leave the Navy and do something else. And I think that's part of what I've come out of this journey is I felt like I spent all this time trying to prove myself, and I no longer need to be here in the Navy to prove myself. And there's other places I want to put my energy and my focus as I move forward. But I was somewhere recently and I was in uniform, and some older retired people were there, and they started asking me about some of my ribbons. And I just kind of fumbled through this, like, oh, well, I was in Afghanistan and we supported a lot of different missions and stuff. But there's got to be more to that. Like, look at the ribbons that you have. It's got to be something else there. And I just remember being like, I don't even know how to answer that now. I don't even know how to explain it, because I was automatically on this defensive of, if I tell them, they're going to be like, oh, you didn't really deserve that ribbon from it.
Yeah.
And so just trying to figure out, how can I answer those questions in a way that's more true to myself and my experiences, and not defensive of, oh, well, I have to act like I don't believe I really deserve it, because that's what they're going to think. And so just trying to reconcile through those processes it's been a journey, and being able to bring those together and honor my experiences, and also say it's time to switch gears. It's time to go do something else. It's time to see what else is out there, instead of just holding close on to this and continuing to fight through this organization that I'm in.
I am borderline teary-eyed. I have goosebumps all over, because everything you just said it needs to be said. I want to give you this space. Okay, so let's role play. Like, what are all those ribbons, Kimberly? Tell me about them, because like this is a space, like, you should be damn proud, girl. Like, everything you've shared with me today is remarkable. First and foremost, females are not supposed to be in combat. Check. Effing amazing. Okay. Navy officer going off in the middle of the night on a helo with a bunch of Afghanistan soldiers and dropped in the middle of God knows where with no direction. Check. Like, I could just go check. I want you to feel validated. I want you to yell it to the world, because everything that you just shared has substance, has meaning. It's part of our history. It's part of missions that were successful. It was part of a growing process in our being in Afghanistan, and you were a part of that. And I want you to know that I appreciate you, but beyond that, I want you to appreciate yourself and I don't want you to be closed off on that. And it just takes, one kind of step at a time. I had a mentor that told me, even if you only put 1% effort in every day, at the end of a year, you've put 365% effort into something. So you've come more than 3 times fold. And so are you actively doing anything now, or to help you through this process? Because first and foremost, I commend you, because the first thing is just acknowledgement, right? And I think you're there. You've definitely acknowledged and put these puzzle pieces together on why you may have behaved certain ways, or why it may have affected your marriage or even other relationships. What else is going on today? Because I'm sure there's plenty of others out there, maybe not even in the military, right? Even in the civilian world, having to prove themselves time and time again, having to try and validate their impact, holding on to something that they don't want to share because they don't want someone to come down and squash it, so that they just hold on to it and they protect it. I mean, that's kind of just our society in general, especially with social media and highlight reels and things of that nature, right? So what are you doing today? Like, where are you at? What are some things that are helping you through it? Is this kind of a to be continued situation?
It's probably somewhat of a to be continued situation. Over the years, I've, gone through different avenues to get help here and there. And so it's kind of like a long journey. And like I said, I think for me, the last piece of it kind of is, reimagining this new life. So like I said, I'm in the process of transitioning out of active duty, and just being able to reimagine a new life and seeing what it's like on that side. So I've spent a lot of time into planning my transition and planning what I want to go do, and imagining what that life is going to be like. And so I think really for me, the next step is, doing that, being on the other side, and then saying, now that I'm here, what do I need now to continue working through this?
Okay. Well, I will share that I feel very strongly that a healing journey, whatever that means for you, it is indeed a journey, and there's no end destination. I feel like there's always another layer you can go deeper. I feel like there's always something that can be learned, and there's always room for growth. So I would just kind of put that in, your hands, and allow you to kind of marinate in it if you seem so inclined. And the other thing that I've seen and I've heard time and time again, and with even what you shared, kind of validates why and how, as we transition out of the military into the civilian space, is that we don't know how to directly align our skills and values and translate them into the civilian world. And we often downplay the things that we've done, the experiences, because you can't really put on a civilian resume that self-sufficient because I got on a helo by myself and was dropped out and I have a great sense of direction, right? So it's this interesting translation. But I had, when I left, and my initial transition out of the military was into law enforcement. So that was a little bit more smooth because similar environments. But when I left the law enforcement and went into the corporate space, that was like culture shock. And I had a Vietnam veteran mentor, thank God, that helped me work through that. And he just kind of ran me through this exercise of, okay, like, let's just put your skill set down, like whatever it comes out. Like, let's pretend you're going to the board for a promotion, right? In the military, write those down and then just transcribe them into something that's more civilian talk or accepted. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't already, or even our listeners that are out there that are, you know, going through this similar situation, to do that, because every single experience and skill and overcoming that you had in the military can also be leveraged in the civilian space. A lot of civilians don't understand it, so we have to, you know, translate it for them and break it down. But don't discredit everything that you've done, because even just that experience of, well, I didn't know where I was going, but I got on, you know, you're willing to learn. Like, I could transcribe all these things for you just because I've done it so much recently. So if you need help, you call me. But again, my point is, don't discredit any of your skills or your experiences. Every single thing that you did can relate into the civilian space. So as you make this transition, you just got to break the bare bones foundation of what was actually going on.
That's great advice. I appreciate it. Thank you.
100% happy. And, you know, we'll stay in contact, and anything you need throughout your continued journey, I'm here for you. So I'm like building this network of amazing combat badass sisters. And honestly, I haven't shared this yet, but here we go. I have a new goal for 2025 to have some type of, we'll call it like a retreat, if you will, because I'm starting to build this network and I want to bring us all together today. I think that would be so amazing, and we'll see what comes of it. And I hope you can join us at that time.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So I think even just talking about a healing journey, I think even coming on here and having this conversation with you is part of that, of just being open to talking about things I don't talk about, and putting it out into the world and saying, I don't really care who hears it and what they have to say about it.
Yeah. Do you know who Brene Brown is?
I do, yeah.
Have you seen her talk on Netflix about being in the arena?
I have not. I've heard of it though.
I would encourage you to watch it. I won't ruin it for you. It's very inspirational. It's something I wake up every morning thinking about, because it's about being vulnerable, but also being aware of the naysayers, and they're in the nosebleeds and you're in the arena. But that's all I'll say. I'll just encourage you to watch it, and I look forward to chatting with you afterwards. I think it'll definitely inspire and help you with that mindset. But yes, absolutely talking about it. And even if you were to just write it down, like anything you want to purge, saying it out loud, picking it up even after you've written it, and then saying it out loud is just a whole nother level of getting into it. So I so appreciate your vulnerability today and sharing your story with me, and yes, ultimately sharing it with the world. Now there's a record of the amazing things that you have done, and really it's just a snapshot. I'm sure there's a whole hour worth more that you could share with me. But this is a really great snapshot of the accomplishments and vulnerability and the missions that you helped with. So thank you. very much.
Thank you so much for what you're doing and leading this platform to be able to put these stories out there.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So I like to wrap up kind of putting it back on your plate and a little bit on a different note, with, especially what's going on in the world today and women hesitating to maybe go into the military and deciding, that's something that they want to do. What is some advice based on your knowledge and experience and background that you would want to pass down to them as they move forward?
I think my biggest takeaway in that area is when I joined, the culture was very much that, women as the minority, we were all trying to prove ourselves. So a lot of times we were trying to prove ourselves that we were better than the other women. Like the competition was fiercer among the women because there was this belief that if one woman screws up or is bad, then it makes us all look bad. And so there was this competition of not to be that one and to separate yourselves from each other because you didn't want, if someone was that one, you didn't want to be associated with them. And we can do so much more when we lift each other up and when we help each other. And that is not the culture of the military I joined, but I see it more now in the groups that I'm in the circles that I'm in. And so that's really my biggest takeaway. Like we can do all these amazing things and we can do so many more amazing things. If you said it even earlier in the podcast, if we lift each other up, if we straighten each other's crown instead of, knocking someone's crown off once it starts to get crooked. And that's really what I just hope that people can do. You can be the best and you can still support maybe those who are struggling a little more. Or if you're struggling a little more, you should be able to ask for help and not worry that you're just going to get judged and be able to ask for that help and that support so that you can, better yourself and be the best version of yourself. And that's really what I hope we will continue to see, that cultural change in the military, especially as you see more and more women doing amazing things. I mean, since I've been in, there've been so many barriers that women have knocked down. So there's no reason for that like woman against woman culture anymore. So let's support each other and let's see what else we can do and keep that momentum going.
I love that. That ends our session beautifully. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I appreciate your time spent with us. And again, Kimberly, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dallas.
Thank you for joining us. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this episode. And remember, there's always a lesson with every experience. It's up to you to learn and grow from it.